Good evening. Thank you, I love that response. It's my pleasure to say to you, SUNY New Paltz, and for our Distinguished Speaker Series event tonight, it is such a joy to welcome Sonali Kolhatkar as our distinguished speaker this evening. Your talk tonight, as I've heard we met this evening, Rising Up, the Power of Narrative in Pursuing Social Justice, probably could not have been more timely in the world in which we live today. So Sonali, I welcome you, and I'm thrilled to see each and every one of you here tonight. Off script a bit, I ask that everyone here engage this as a sacred space of engaging and openly sitting with difficult questions and being respectful of what SUNY New Paltz means and has meant to people for over or nearly 200 years. Period. End of statement. If you have any questions, see me outside afterwards. Seriously. As I continue engaging this community in now my second year, and I see my predecessor, President Emeritus Don Christian, it is an honor, and an honor that is heavy on each of us who serve as president to do the best that we can each and every day to serve this university. Now in its 15th year, the SUNY New Paltz Distinguished Speaker Series connects students, faculty, and staff with well-known authors and critical thinkers on issues of policy, science, media, business, people, and other luminary content agenda. On this, our campus, that we get to craft a narrative that is about who we are as SUNY New Paltz. I want to acknowledge, where's Erica? I need to see her. There you are. I almost lost my orientation for you. I want to acknowledge the SUNY New Paltz Foundation, the Lewis and Mildred Risnick Institute, and the Elting Library. I have a new family right here up front. We may not look like it, but we're Wheelers and other extended families in the room, along with the support of many, many generous sponsors. Thank you for our many sponsors and all that you bring to this endeavor. Thank you to our instructional media services team who's working, I want to say behind the scene. Hey, F, how you doing back there? I want to say thank you to those who are working behind the scenes, but actually in this day and age, if we didn't have them working, there would be no scene. I want to say that following the presentation, there will be autographs, signings. The first book is mine. I've already claimed that. I have a nephew coming, or cousin coming next week to tour the campus as a potential applicant. He's coming up from Texas. So on Monday, be on your best behavior so that I can impress him and encourage him to be part of our community. And I want to thank you, the community of Sodexo. And I really do have a cousin coming on Monday the 27th to tour the campus. That's not a fib. So if you see me trying to impress and I've dressed up and combed my hair and brushed my teeth, that's for real. I want to thank our community members from Sodexo for all that you do. Some of you joined me for a reception, and Donovan, where's Donovan? Where is he sitting? My husband, Donovan, we thank you for being here with us. And I want to say, as I be quiet, and I did say as I be quiet, as I become quiet and sit in the moment of this instance, let me say to you, this moment will never exist again. Ever. You have one opportunity to embrace where you are tonight as we welcome and introduce our distinguished speaker for the 15th session of the speaker series, Ms. Sonali Kolhatkar. And I want to say just briefly that your career in business TV anchoring, national political commentary, and as we discussed, the pathway from astronomy and physics, really? Astronomy and physics to journalism, and your reckoning with what it means to be an impactful person on this universe has impressed me so much, and I look forward to hearing your words. Welcome, Sonali. All yours.
Let me turn my mic on.
I'm gonna move this stuff out of the way.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Awesome. All right. Let me just get my notes here and order my scribbled notes. And actually, before we do that, you know, my parents never can figure out why I do what I do, and they won't believe me when I tell them that I stood in front of, like, I don't know, is there 100 of you? So I'm gonna take a picture, all right? Here we go. Let's take some pictures. Because I gotta prove it to them. Should probably take a selfie with me in there, because, all right. Thank you so much for coming here on a weeknight. To hear a talk about racial justice, a topic that we've been grappling with on a public scale for several years now, and really for decades and centuries before that, but in earnest, especially this modern chapter of grappling, at least since 2020, and really at least since 2016. You know, many of us have tried to figure out or make sense of what happened in November 2016 and the years that followed after that, right? Like watching in horror and amazement as Donald Trump went from the Trump Tower to the White House and asking ourselves, how could this have happened? Why did it happen? And a lot has been written about the subject. A lot has been written about what happened in 2016. And, you know, as a journalist for 20 plus years now, and even in 2016, it was almost 2 decades, I understood very clearly on that night, election night in 2016, how storytelling in large part got us to where we were in 2016 and continues to impact our society in ways that we may not fully appreciate or understand or really articulate. And that was my goal with writing this book, with talking to folks like yourself all around the country to understand what narrative is, how it shapes our culture, why it's important, how you can identify narratives in everything around you, and then how you can shape narratives yourself to your end, whatever that might be. So I define narrative as intentional storytelling. You may not be cognizant of your intention. It may be subconscious. It may be overt, but it's basically just intentional storytelling. And so the idea of how white supremacy especially has been maintained, its origin story especially, goes back to the origin of this nation. But if we want to look specifically at what happened in 2016, you can go as far back as this guy, maybe a little further back to this guy, and other guys like them. The black and white photo is Bob Grant, Robert Gigante, or Gigante, that was his real name. Bob Grant was a shock jock, a right-wing shock jock, who was on WABC from 1984 to 1996. And he made a living off of talking about ideas, talking about the news through a racist lens. That was basically what he did. One of the things that I point out in my book, to just give you an idea of what it was he did on a regular basis, was that he interviewed in 1986 a white man named Bernard Gates, who became famous for shooting 4 young black men in a New York City subway because they had allegedly demanded $5 from him. 3 of the victims, of his shooting victims, recovered. The 4th was an 18-year-old young man named Darrell Caby. He was paralyzed and permanently brain damaged after Gates shot him point blank. And the teenager was cowering in a corner. And what Bob Grant, the man in black and white, asked Bernhard Gates was why he didn't finish the job by killing them all. So he based his broadcasting on the dehumanization of people of color. And then, of course, later came Rush Limbaugh and so many others like them. And when you have people with a bully pulpit, when you have people with a microphone spewing dehumanizing ideas to millions of Americans day after day after day, it obviously shapes the way they think. And we get Fox News after that. This is from Media Matters for America. It's rather Free Press, which is one of the many media watchdog groups that I follow, who, you know, even though most of us understand when we watch Fox News what story they're trying to tell, Media Matters does the fact-checking for us and lays out in very clear terms why Fox News, even without Tucker Carlson, remains basically a purveyor of racist ideas. And when you have that sort of thing, that's an institution that's so powerful in this country, it's going to shape the culture and continue to shape the culture of our nation. And Jen Senko did this fascinating documentary. I don't know if any of you have ever seen it. It's a small independent film that she made a few years ago called The Brainwashing of My Dad. It's a very personal film, but I love the fact that it's personal because it's a story that she tells that many of us can relate to. Her father, a very nice man, a sweet liberal white man, changed jobs, started truck driving, and started getting exposed to AM radio, and turned from a sweet, fairly liberal-minded, kind person into somebody who was angry all the time, resentful all the time, and, you know, espoused and spewed racist ideas. So we have had a country that has been shaped for several decades. I won't go back further than that because, of course, there's a lot more further than that. History books have been written about it. But at least if we want to try to understand specifically Trump, we've had a country shaped for decades by the racist narratives that came from Fox News, Rush Limbaugh, Bob Grant. Most of you know this part already, right? So enter Donald Trump in 2015. He didn't lie about who he was. He never tried to mislead Americans. He just said it straight up. When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. And some, I assume, are good people. This was his inaugural address. He just laid it out. I mean, he basically said, hello, I am a white supremacist. Elect me so that I can be a white supremacist president. He was very clear about it. And he was a result of the right-wing media. The stories that they wove about people of color, about Mexicans, about anybody who was considered the other. But, you know, you might argue we have a liberal media in this country, one that the right-wing media constantly reminds us of, constantly tells us are part of the problem. So the corporate so-called liberal media ought to have been the bulwark against the right-wing media. What did the corporate so-called liberal media do when Donald Trump announced to the world that he was running on a white supremacist platform? They fact-checked him. They fact-checked him, which is amazing. I'm a journalist. I'm definitely down for fact-checking, always. I will never reject a good fact-check. But that's all they did. They wanted to tell you painstakingly, oh, look, it turns out Mexicans aren't all rapists. We did the research. What a revelation, right? They failed to identify that he was a racist. They did not use the word racist because the corporate so-called liberal media that is supposed to be the protector of democracy, that is supposed to be objective, that is supposed to be central to upholding a liberal democracy, decided it would be too biased to call a racist a racist. And they didn't do it until 2019, when he basically used or put out a trope that I, and people like me have faced from the minute we might step into this nation, which is the sort of the go back to where you came from variety. So what did he do in 2019? So he's gotten elected. You know, the Washington Post has fact-checked him, hoping, I think, that people would see the light and not vote for him. He gets into office. He's in office for several years. In 2019, he puts out a tweet about the Squad, the 4 congresswomen of color, who represent the America that he is trying to protect white Americans from. And he basically said, why don't they go back to their countries of origin and fix the problems from where they came? And, you know, it was just Trump being Trump. He wasn't doing anything different. And it was not until this moment that our corporate so-called liberal media decided to painstakingly conclude that it was okay to call Trump a racist. And they were so proud of themselves. They convened meetings. The Washington Post had an editorial meeting. NPR had an editorial meeting. And I do count NPR as part of the corporate liberal media, because even if they are nonprofit, they thrive on corporate sponsorships. Their model is very similar to the New York Times, the Washington Post, etc. So they finally decided, when it was too late, when we had already had a racist in the White House who was dehumanizing people like me and others, making it dangerous for us to walk around, it was not until then that they decided it was okay to call him a racist. And they were so proud of themselves. NPR made the decision this week to call President Trump's tweets about a group of Democratic congresswomen racist. They wrote news articles about their decision. And it was a shame. It was a shameful chapter in the media, in the so-called corporate liberal media, that has decided that calling somebody out as a racist was being biased. This was Keith Woods, who was the diversity officer at NPR. Report on racism, but ditch the labels, meaning, you know, be professional about it. And as an independent journalist, I can't tell you how many times I've been told that it's important to be professional, because being professional means being objective, and being objective means reporting on the facts and not naming the things that are actually happening. So it's okay to say, turns out all Mexicans aren't rapists, but we can't call the guy who said that a racist, because that would be biased. The corporate media failed us. They failed our nation. And so between the right-wing media and the corporate media, you had the right-wing media's story standing without being challenged. It was the narrative that was shaped for us, that it was okay to be openly white supremacist, because nobody worth listening to, at least the corporate media, was saying otherwise necessarily. They were saying it, but they weren't really saying it. They were saying it hoping he would go away, but he didn't go away. So enter the 2020 racial justice uprisings, right? We had the brutal murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, and the largest uprising, the largest public uprising in the history of this nation. Millions of Americans showed up, and that transpired in city after city, town after town in this country. It was a beautiful thing to behold, because the rest of us, most of us in America, had understood the story that Trump was trying to tell and were rejecting it, even if the corporate media was late to the party. And the corporate media decided that Black Lives Matter suddenly in 2020. That slogan was conceived of in 2014, almost, more than half a decade earlier, by 3 Black women, Patrisse Cullors, Alicia Garza, and Opal Tometi. I know their names because I've interviewed them multiple times on my show, the show that I do as a weekly broadcast, years before the corporate media discovered them. And so my audience, when my audience heard the term Black Lives Matter, it made sense to them, because it was part of the bigger story of how we were living in a racist country where black people's lives have not mattered, and therefore there was a demand for black lives to matter. But the corporate media didn't tell that story. And so when they were confronted before 2020 with this idea of Black Lives Matter, to them and their audiences and their readers, it sounded like black people were saying they wanted special treatment, that they were demanding their lives to matter more than everyone else's, because there was a disconnect. And they're continuing to do this. After 2020, there were all these mea culpas. The LA Times apologized, and even National Geographic apologized for like decades of racist coverage. The Kansas City Star-News, by the way, small newspaper, had the best apology because they actually audited their coverage and promised to do better and hired more reporters of color. There were all these mea culpas, right? So suddenly it was, okay, in 2020, all right, we've accepted that Black Lives Matter. But we can't go too far. Defund the police? No, that's going too far. Time and again, the corporate media have been late to the party. They've been behind the times. They have had to catch up. I mean, do you think that when the civil rights movement was unfolding, that the mainstream media was all gung-ho about these ideas? No. They were being objective back then as well. In hindsight, they have accepted the tenets of racial justice, and they are continuing to do so. So you can go further. When you say Black Lives Matter, what does that mean? How do we make Black Lives Matter? Maybe one way is to divert some funding away from the things that oppress us, that kill us, towards the things that actually keep us safe, which is the basic idea behind defund the police. That's going too far, right? So 2023 now, 3 years later, the corporate media still don't like this slogan. But the rest of us are talking about it, if you're in independent media. I wrote this in 2023, but it's been something that I've been writing about a long time. Which is, if we want to actually make Black Lives Matter as much as everyone else's, and make the lives of people of color matter, we can't keep pouring money into policing. And policing is a central theme of why we have racial injustice in this nation. So it is really, really important for us to see where the corporate media's narratives fail us over and over again. So right now the narrative is, okay, we agree Black Lives Matter, but we can't actually do the work that it requires to make that true. I've been talking, as I mentioned, Patrisse Cullors, before she was, now she doesn't take my calls because she's so busy. And this is the story, by the way, of an independent journalist. Like, you can interview all these people that are going to get Columbus, right, discovered by the mainstream media. And then they're going to forget all about you, but you gave them a platform when others didn't, when the corporate media didn't. And so Patrisse Cullors used to come in studio with me and talk about, she's based in LA where I am, and we would talk on my show, which used to be called Uprising, it's now Rising Up with Sonali, and we used to talk about what was happening. We used to talk about police brutality, racist police brutality. The other young woman sitting next to her is Jasmine Abdullah, who is the head of the Pasadena chapter of Black Lives Matter, and was a young, newly activated person, and she's someone whose career I followed as well. And these are the kinds of stories that we in the independent press have been telling again and again and again. And for us, it was a given. When black folks said that the police were killing them disproportionately, we believed them. We didn't need the video evidence. I've been covering racist police brutality before the era of smartphones. I didn't need video evidence to believe it was true. It's like believing rape victims. Why would they make it up? You believe victims and survivors when they tell you what's happening to them, but the corporate media needed proof, right? If that video of Rodney King's beating had not reached TV news, we wouldn't, I don't know how long it would have been before we believed that instance, that sort of thing happening. So Independent media have for years been ahead of the curve because we're unfettered by advertising. We're literally independent by design, and one of the things that independent media does is try to shape the narratives about who we are as people. And it's a very simple idea, it's a very simple story. It's a story that says, I am a human being like you. I am a complex human being, I'm fallible, I have many dimensions to me. What you see and your impression of me is probably different from what I really am. I'm a person who hurts when hurt. I'm a person who has feelings. And independent media has tried to shift the narrative of corporate media and of right-wing media for years to simply say, let's start humanizing all people. And that comes down to the nuts and bolts of the language that we use. So one of the things that was part of the reason why Donald Trump could say what he said about Mexicans being rapists was because for years the right-wing media had paved his way by calling people illegals. I mean, that is a term that is so dehumanizing. You're not a person, you're an illegal. Forget about it being grammatically incorrect. You're an illegal, right? The unsaid part is alien, illegal alien. By the way, alien is the official US government term for what an immigrant is. Talk about dehumanizing. You're literally not a human being. You're an alien, illegal alien. And so illegal was a word that became more and more adopted by the right-wing media. The corporate media decided not to challenge it very much till Color Lines magazine, which was an incredible online media outlet, launched a campaign called Drop the I Word. The woman who wrote the foreword to my book, Rinku Sen, used to run Color Lines magazine, and they launched this incredible campaign pressuring the mainstream media to drop the I word, start talking about people as human beings, and it worked. Associated Press was the first to change their style book. And so that is such a concrete example of how independent media have been pushing the narratives and pushing corporate media to change the narrative around how we think of each other, how we treat each other as human beings, right? We are humans. We're not inmates. We're people who are incarcerated. We're not illegals. We're people without papers. We're people first and foremost. And when you accept the humanity of a person, you cannot undermine their right to exist, to have the things they need to be happy and to be content. So the news media is only one narrative-setting industry. I write about it a lot because that's what I do. I'm in the media, and it's what I know best. It's a deeply influential narrative-setting industry. But I also live in Los Angeles, and I'm steeped in Hollywood culture. And Hollywood, I would say, is arguably the most powerful, influential narrative-setting industry in not just the United States, but the world. You know, I grew up on the other side of the planet. Everything I knew about America was from Hollywood, movies and TV shows. And, you know, I was terrified of high school bullies and jealous of kids who had lockers. I thought everybody in Texas wore cowboy hats and boots and spoke with a drawl. Well, that part is true, but I actually went to the University of Texas at Austin, so I can say that. But Hollywood is such an important narrative-setting industry, and it shapes our views on racial justice, no matter how liberal the right and conservative Americans want us to believe Hollywood is. Hollywood is as liberal as any narrative-setting industry, which is to say it is as liberal as the people who are part of that industry. And if an industry is going to be dominated by one demographic, you're going to get one point of view, and that's, you know, up until recent years, that's basically what we've been getting. So I write a lot about how pop culture is shaped. And my favorite thing to write about when I talk about narrative setting in Hollywood is propaganda. I didn't invent that term, but I love it. It's, you know, pro-police propaganda. And this is a still from Watchmen by Damon Lindelof, who did that kind of cool show Lost about a decade ago. I don't know if anyone's seen Watchmen, but it was, you know, kind of it was touted as this groundbreaking show because it has a storyline centered on the Tulsa Race Massacre. And I thought I would make things difficult for myself by critiquing a TV show that's ostensibly going to do the right thing and say the right thing, and turns out that it's not. There are many easier targets I could have gone for, but I decided to use the Damon Lindelof's Watchmen as an example of everything that's problematic with Hollywood when it comes to covering policing and cops. So in this world of fiction that Damon Lindelof creates in this TV show, you have white supremacists, and you have masked vigilantes, and you have people of color, and you have cops. And the white supremacists are the natural villains, and the victims, or the people that they go after, are black folks, people of color in general, and police. Police are targeted by white supremacists. So in the opening scenes, one of the earliest parts of the first episode of this show, you have a white motorist being stopped by a black cop, and the white motorist shoots the black cop. Right? In real life, we see instance after instance of police officers, often white but not always, disproportionately shooting black folks, in particular black men who are unarmed, disproportionately compared to their population. And Damon Lindelof decided to show white supremacist motorist shooting a black cop, and it was a clever way to sort of confer innocence upon the cop. And Regina King, who is this amazing black actress, is also plays a cop in this show, and she's this powerful black woman who has you rooting for her because she is a powerful black woman, but she's also a cop. So Damon Lindelof's gotten you riled up and cheering on the cop who's beating up the white supremacist. And you're cheering on the vigilante violence. She's clearly breaking the law because cops aren't supposed to beat up suspects. But it's a white supremacist Klansman, so it's okay. And Hollywood does this over and over and over again. And a fantastic study by Color of Change called Normalizing Injustice lays out how the scripted crime genre in Hollywood has convinced Americans that basically cops are the good guys. Even when they're breaking the rules, they're the good guys because they're doing it for a good reason. And there's lots of stats in there that you can look at. And one of Hollywood's favorite things to do is to cast people of color as cops and normalize the idea of policing. Damon Lindelof says, his favorite TV show growing up was Miami Vice, a buddy cop show. He used to do ride-alongs with the San Francisco Police Department. To him, police aren't scary or dangerous because he has lived his life not fearing them. So he writes what he knows. And when you have a different kind of a person writing the stories who has had a completely different experience of feeling fear when a cop shows up, you're going to get a different kind of story. This was my favorite show in Dubai growing up. I don't know if anyone remembers 21 Jump Street. I loved 21 Jump Street. Thought Johnny Depp was super cute. I don't anymore because of what he's done. And I won't get into that. But this show was broadcast around the world. I was a teenager growing up in the United Arab Emirates, watching this show like millions of other kids and people around the world. And I didn't really realize how sly a piece of propaganda it was back then. But it's basically for very telegenic, mostly people of color, posing as teenagers in high school, but they're really undercover cops. And they're normalizing this idea of policing in schools, normalizing this idea that cops are the good guys out to get the bad guys. They're here to keep us all safe, and propaganda. And today's propaganda is very, very, I think, subversive and needs to be called out, which is that over and over again. Try to notice it. Next time you watch a TV show, see if there's a cop who's a person of color who's been see if there's a cop character who's been cast as a person of color. And you see that it happens shocking numbers of times. I have lots of friends in the industry just living where I do, and black actors who are friends of mine will tell me that they get offered cop roles all the time. Anyway, so this is something that's really, really important for us to point out, because Hollywood is deeply, deeply influential. Hollywood is the NRA's best friend, right? We don't really think of liberal Hollywood as promoting gun violence. I went to watch that Indiana Jones film because I have 2 sons, and I got bullied into watching this movie, Indiana Jones. And the very first, 10 minutes of the movie, has anyone watched the new Indiana Jones film? Right? It's kind of like, you've got the opening scene, there's a chase in, there's the bad guys, and there's the Nazis, and Indiana Jones and Harrison Ford, the CGI version, is running over on top of on a moving train with his buddy, and they're being chased by a Nazi. I don't know how they're staying on the moving train without falling, and that's okay, right? It's Hollywood. They can take us into the realm of fantasy, and of course they pull out at the last minute the gun and shoot the Nazi. And right there you've got the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun trope that the NRA tells us over and over and over again. And Hollywood promotes gun violence and solving problems through guns every single day. Every Marvel movie you've watched, so many movies, guns are so normalized, and it's important for us to call this out, because this is the narrative that Hollywood is shaping in our minds, is that gun violence is acceptable, and guns keep you safe, when it is precisely the other way around. Think about abortion and how our country's culture has been shaped around abortion, right? We've had decades and decades of Hollywood movies and TV shows where, a woman might get pregnant, and then she agonizes about whether she should keep the pregnancy or terminate it. She might even go to a Planned Parenthood clinic, and then she'll change her mind at the last minute. Remember Juno? Remember that film? And this is liberal Hollywood. Liberal Hollywood has, until recently, because they saw what happened with the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the Dobbs decision, until recently, so-called liberal Hollywood has continued to stigmatize abortion and to make it out to be a dirty, dirty thing that we're supposed to be ashamed of over and over again. But it doesn't have to be that way, because Hollywood has so much power to shape our culture for the better if it wants to, and one of the few ways that it has is on normalizing marriage equality, right? We went, in just 10 short years or so, from being a nation that was either ambivalent about same-sex marriage, or kind of, accepting of it as long as it stayed in the shadows, to being one that, in California, liberal California, passing a proposition that made it illegal till it was overturned. And Hollywood came to the rescue. Hollywood mobilized the characters. They changed the storylines. We started seeing LGBTQ couples on screen. We started seeing gay couples kissing each other and being intimate and having romantic entanglements and relations. In other words, we started seeing LGBTQ people as human beings, as fully formed human beings with a full suite of rights that they deserve. And we watched them getting married on screen. That's a still from 6 Feet Under, which was a show, right, an HBO show from over a decade ago, which normalized not just interracial marriage, but an interracial gay marriage. And we see our cultural shift today. So when Hollywood wants to, it has changed our culture. We need to push Hollywood, and indeed, Hollywood is changing, not because Hollywood has decided it should change, but because people of color have clawed their ways into the executive suites and the writers' rooms. People like Ava DuVernay, who is another one of these people who will not give me the time of day now, but back when, when nobody knew who she was, she would come in the studio and join me in Los Angeles to talk about a film. In 2011, I circled the dates because I wanted you to see it. In 2011, 4 years before she made Selma, she was in studio at KPFK Pacifica Radio, where I was a broadcaster, talking about her film, I Will Affirm, and can't remember the name of the film now, but I Will Follow. and talking about Affirm, this organization that was there to promote black filmmakers like her. And, you know, she and others like her have been changing Hollywood from the inside, you know, forcing their way and shaming the executives into allowing them to tell their own stories. People like Ryan Coogler, who I got to interview before, you know, Ryan Coogler did Black Panther. He did Fruitvale Station, a beautiful, beautiful movie about Oscar Grant's last day of life. Oscar Grant, the young black man who was killed by BART police in Oakland, California, the same city that Ryan Coogler grew up in, and he made this powerful film starring Michael B. Jordan as Oscar Grant, and it's just his last day on Earth. That's it. It doesn't cover the protests after Oscar Grant was killed by a BART police officer. It doesn't cover, you know, anything that went before that last day. It just shows you a slice of life of Oscar Grant, this human being who had a daughter, who had relationships, who had a mother, who was going to his mother's house on New Year's Eve before he went out with his friends, before he was gunned down. And when you watch that film, you grieve the death of Oscar Grant, and you deeply understand the injustice of his killing by police in a way that doesn't hit you over the head with it, but just tells you the story of how human Oscar Grant was. And Ryan Coogler was probably the only person who could have told the story before he then went on to make the Black Panther. Boots Riley, another incredible filmmaker, indie filmmaker, whose film, you might know him from I'm a Virgo on his Amazon series, but really go watch Sorry to Bother You, the film that he made several years ago, an incredible anti-racist, anti-capitalist film that I really, really admire. And filmmakers like Boots Riley and Ryan Coogler and Ava DuVernay and now, you know, Taika Waititi and Sterling Harjo and all of these incredible filmmakers of color, Issa Rae, you know, are changing Hollywood, are shaping our narrative industry, the most powerful narrative-setting industry in the world, and they're changing the way we think about race and racism, about how we think about each other. And I feel like it's really, really important for us to think about the story that we're trying to change, right? There's a reason why our country is experiencing this spasm of pain since at least 2015. And that's because the demographics are shifting. It's a very different country today than it was when I showed up on a plane from Dubai in Austin, Texas, as a 16-year-old kid who had never been to the United States before, who was desperately terrified of asserting myself, of talking to people. I had never honestly properly interacted with a white person in my life except for the one white friend that my parents had. And it's a very different country today. In just the last 25, 30 years, we have seen a dramatic demographic shift, and that is what conservative whites are terrified of today. And that is what forms the basis of the story that Bob Grant and Tucker Carlson and Rush Limbaugh and all those others, and Sean Hannity and Lou Dobbs and others like them who are continuing today, Ann Coulter, you know, I don't want to name too many of them because I'll have to wash my mouth out afterwards. But the story that they are trying to tell us, and the story that Donald Trump is trying to tell us, is one of fear. This is how the story goes, and it's really important because this is the narrative. The story goes, America was this country discovered by intrepid white settlers, white Christian men settlers. And we made it something out of nothing. There was nobody here before. We made it this amazing country. We made it the most powerful country on the planet, militarily, financially. It's our country. And now, black people want special treatment. And undocumented immigrants want to be given the same rights as us. And people of color are cutting in line. They're taking what's ours. And we're not going to let them. That story, even if they don't articulate it in that way, is at the basis of their coverage. It's at the basis of conservative media coverage. It is the thing that doesn't get challenged by the corporate media or so-called liberal Hollywood. It is the thing that we have to confront head on, because it is a story that's steeped in it's steeped in fear. And it's too late. The train has left the station. We are here. And the promise of a multiracial democracy is a beautiful promise. And I'll get to that later. But I want to talk about the ways in which we do narrative work outside of Hollywood and outside of the news industry in a way that is shaping this new story that all of us need to be telling. The reason we have these attacks on so-called critical race theory education on campuses across the country is because enough academia and academics of color started offering ethnic studies courses, started wanting to shape the narratives of how this country was formed and its history. And so you have these attacks on critical race theory, and I want to tell the story of why it is so important. But one story at a time, one person's experience at a time helps us understand how these things work. And it's people like Brittany Murphy who conservatives want to keep critical race theory courses away from. It's not just people of color who benefit from learning the true history of the United States. It's young white Americans like Brittany Murphy, a conservative Republican. She interned for Mississippi's conservative Republican governor. She took a course at the University of Mississippi Law School. It was a critical race theory course. She took it innocently enough. And her parents and her father, they were really scared. They're like, oh, they're going to brainwash you. And she was confused. She took the course, and she said it was one of the most enlightening courses she had ever taken. It helped her understand so much. It helped her make sense of the country and the world. And she said, why are they so fearful of people just theorizing and thinking? We're not going to turn into like communists. Y'all chill out now. She was being, I went to Texas for 5 years, so I can do that. But it is precisely her and her ability to broaden her mind, to change the story in her head of what this nation is, that the white conservative narrative setters are terrified of. You don't have to be a journalist or a professor or a filmmaker to be engaged in narrative change. Black Twitter showed us the power of collective narrative shifting through social media. We understand now that Black Twitter may no longer be existing because, I wrote this book before Elon Musk bought Twitter, so forgive me. But Black Twitter was so powerful and so influential over the 10 years or so that it mustered power, collective power, that there have been studies, whole studies done on it, and I cite several of them in my book, including this one. And it's just been incredible, an incredible force for collective narrative shifting for people who've been left out of the narrative shifting industries, taking matters into their own hands and speaking out. Another case in point of an incredible action that stemmed from Black Twitter was April Rain, who made this one little pithy tweet in 2015, Oscar are so white, they asked to touch my hair. She's watching the Academy Awards, and she's watching one best film after another, one best film nominee after another, and they're all white, and everybody on stage is white, and she's not seeing herself reflected on that stage, nor is she seeing any of the actual filmmakers who did make films that, whose films were completely snubbed by the Academy on stage. And so she called it out, the hashtag went viral, and the Academy was forced to change. They had to change their membership, the people who vote on the films. It's become more diverse now. Still lots of problems, but so much better than it was thanks to the power, the narrative shifting power of people like April and Black Twitter. And just Darnella Frazier, the young Black woman who watched George Floyd getting killed, was part of this story as well. On Twitter, actually it was on Facebook, that she made this post. And I really want to point this out because for me, this was such a seminal example of how the corporate media, again, was shamed into covering a story. Used to be, before we had Twitter and social media, used to be cops would kill with impunity, And the corporate media would come and they would interview witnesses, and then they would mostly just report what the police said happened, which was looking at the police report, which is basically the police saying, oh, he reached for his gun. We thought he reached for his gun, we shot him. And so over and over again, the corporate media would just report the official storyline. When George Floyd was killed, look at what Darnella Frazier did. Not only did she immediately post the entire gruesome video so that the world could see the ugly brutality, the savagery of what was done to George Floyd, she framed what happened in 2 pithy sentences. They killed him right in front of Cupfoots. They killed him. They killed him. No type of sympathy, heartbreak, hashtag police brutality. She set the stage. She made very clear what had happened, and that tweet, of course, went viral, that post went viral, and the corporate media was forced to cover George Floyd's killing right from the start as a story of injustice, not as a story of an unfortunate accident that maybe it might come out later was a story of injustice. By then, all the momentum's gone. She changed history just by that one little tweet and Facebook page. Another way in which narrative shifting happens is simply by learning how to talk to one another. How many of us have had relatives whose, relationships with whom, who we lost relationships with during the Trump years? I had that. I had a family member who would just post some garbage on Facebook and alienate me, and I would call him out instead of trying to talk to him. That happened to so many millions of Americans, right? Probably people in this room have members of your family, right, where you don't talk to them anymore because they voted for Trump or they said something about Trump, and you thought you have chosen to back a person who undermines my right to exist and thrive. I cannot accept that. And so one of the things that I really feel that we absolutely need to do as we start to tell our story of a multiracial democracy and how we achieve it is to start calling each other in and not just calling each other out. So I profiled Loretta Ross, who's this incredible veteran activist who started Sister Song, a reproductive justice organization. Now she's also an academic, and she does these wonderful courses, which she charges like $5 for. This same course that she teaches at the university and gets paid decently to do. She also does online courses for the public where she trains people on how to talk to each other. And she calls it building a calling in culture, the art of calling each other in, which is to say with love, I disagree with your story of who belongs and gets to thrive in this nation, and here's why, and here's who I am, and don't you think I too deserve the right to thrive like you? It's the basis of what organizations like People's Action have been doing with their election campaigns. They call it deep canvassing, which is a fancy new name for an old idea, which is door-to-door knocking, and not telling people how you think they should vote, but talking to them about what it is that moves them. What is it that makes them happy? What is it that they wish they had? And helping them relate to the same things that you are wishing for, hoping for, fighting for. And so I think it's really, really important, and I want to wrap up here, really important for us to think about how we tell stories. As somebody who's been in the news media for 20 plus years now, I have often sort of suffered from a secondary PTSD, because when you cover one crisis after another in the world, it wears you down. How many of you think the world is just going to hell in a handbasket? You feel despair, right? You feel a lot of despair, and I did too for a long time. You feel despair because what our corporate media is telling us, and of course, setting aside what the right-wing media is telling us, which is that your country is being overrun by all these others, setting that aside, the corporate media will give you all the facts, right? They're constantly fact-checking for you, but they're not helping you see it in context. They're not connecting any of the dots to help you understand that this thing that's happening here is related to that thing that's happening there, and helping you see the big picture. Neither are they covering the beautiful things that are being done to right the wrongs. They're following the adage of if it bleeds, it leads. right? If somebody burns down a store here, we'll cover that. If somebody breaks that down, if there's a terror attack, we'll cover that. We're not going to cover the beautiful world building that is actually happening. So some people ask me, what happened to Black Lives Matter? In 2020, they were really active. Now it's, well, you wouldn't know it. If you read the corporate media, you would think Black Lives Matter just disappeared. Well, guess what? They're in communities all over the country, diverting funding away from policing toward things that keep us safe. In Los Angeles, where I live, they're getting abolitionists. Police abolitionists are getting elected to the city council. Ulysses Hernandez is a young Latina woman who has worked for years on the front lines of divestment from policing, who is now on the city council, and she's part of BLM and other local organizations. There is a pilot program in Los Angeles to have non-armed officers do traffic stops, which is where most violence often occurs when police interact with the public. There are things that are being done all over the country in local communities, but you don't necessarily see the stories, or if you see them in isolation and they're not tied to one another. My new job, I used to work at KPFK Pacifica Radio as a radio broadcaster. I now work as the racial justice editor at Yes Magazine, which is a solutions journalism outlet, which for 25 plus years has covered the solutions that people are engaged in to fix the crises in our world. And let me tell you, I'm not as traumatized as I used to be, because I'm now seeing the forest for the trees, helping to shape the narrative of the beautiful world that we want to build. So their story is the story of fear, of loss, right? The conservative white supremacist story is one of disempowerment. You can't have healthcare because, we can't all have government-funded healthcare because I'm not going to let my taxes pay for your healthcare, right? We can't have fully funded prescription coverage, or we can't extend Medicare for everybody, or we can't tax the rich, because if we tax the rich, then some of my friends and that's going to help pay for things that make you happy and safe, and we can't have that. Every policy, right-wing policy, can be understood through that lens of fear, deprivation, keeping what's ours, keeping a stranglehold on it. That's their story. What is our story? How do we start to tell the beautiful story of a multiracial democracy, one where we've solved the climate crisis and our children have a future because we mobilized, one where we share resources and reject labels because we understand that our tax dollars should pay for the things that keep us happy and safe, because why not? How do we tell that story? And that's the story that I, as a journalist, want to tell more of, want all of you to learn to identify, engage in, and help tell. That's the story that young people all over the world, and the country, especially here in the United States, are telling. You know, when I first came, as I mentioned, when I first came to the United States, I was this 16-year-old foreigner with an accent and brown skin and a hard-to-pronounce name. I'm so sorry, Daryl. You know, I hear you. It's a hard-to-pronounce name. And up until, well into my 20s, I held on to that fear, the fear of asserting my full humanity. I remember I got involved and active around politics when I started looking at what the U.S. had been doing in Afghanistan in the early 2000s after the September 11th attacks. And my first article that I ever wrote was for this free newspaper in Los Angeles called Changelings. And in the very last minute before I turned in the story, I changed my name, and I'm not proud of it. Instead of the byline saying Sonali Kolhatkar, I chose Sally Ingalls. Sally, because that's what I would tell the pizza delivery place over the phone my name was, and Ingalls because that's my husband's last name that I proudly decided not to take, but adopted for that one story. And I was ashamed of myself. When I saw that byline, I was ashamed of having given into the fear of being otherized, of being seen as somebody who doesn't have the right to fully be here. And I could have changed myself to fit the world, right? Because everything about who we are tells the story of who we are. Every little bit about how we carry ourselves, how we look, the clothes we wear, tells a story of who we are, shapes the narratives around with one another about who we are, who gets to belong, who gets to be here. And I could have changed myself to fit into this world. But instead, I chose to change the world. Thank you.
So there's a lot of content in there, and we're going to take some time to do questions and responses. I think we may have about 10 minutes max. And then what I'll ask you to do at the end of the 10 minutes, we know we won't get to every question, please remain seated while Sonali is escorted to the book signing area, okay? Just so that we can be orderly in the process. So, microphones on both ends. We ask that you approach a microphone if you have a question so that we can hear it and have responses. Here we are.
Hi.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I wrote a prompt because I could talk forever about this. So I'd like to engage your perspective, right? My thesis in undergrad was centered, or maybe I should introduce myself. My name is Mackenzie. I'm a graduate student here at SUNY New Paltz. And my thesis in undergrad was centered on Black psychosocial disequilibrium and development. So I would argue this everlasting battle we are fighting needs to also focus on our youth.
Youth.
Always, now maybe more than ever, youth of color may experience an identity crisis in their psychosocial development, in their journey to understanding who they are. So with such fierce pushback on implementing critical race theory, how can we introduce concepts of race, bias, and unfiltered history to our youth, not only youth of color, to heighten consciousness in younger ages?
That's a great question. And, I have to say that if you change the kinds of things that you read or get, the places where you get your news, you might not feel as pessimistic about this world because folks like yourself are asserting themselves, like you and me are asserting ourselves in campuses like this in ways that just wasn't happening before, asking these incredible questions. And I want to just give you a statistic that I cite in the very end of my book, which was also really, I think, heartening, which is that the demographics are changing so dramatically that the 2020 U.S. Census revealed a massive 276% jump in the 2 or more races population. What's incredible is that there are kids who, like my kids, who are multiracial within themselves, individuals who are multiracial in ways that we just didn't have before, and they are asking questions like you are asking. And I think the main thing that we can do is to just, first of all, assert our humanity and say, do you agree that we all have the right to thrive in the fullness of our being, that none of us deserve to be second-class citizens? If the answer to that is yes, then you can start from a place of agreement. If the answer to that is no, walk away, because you're talking to somebody who doesn't believe you're fully human and who really is probably beyond your help, and who wants you to probably leave the nation, because there are people who literally want that, right? And when we it's hard to save them or help them. So we do need to start calling each other in, but we also need to start calling out the extreme racists. We have to figure out ways in which we talk to one another. I think that many of us who can stand it need to start having the difficult discussions with the white supremacists, and those of us who are, for very good reason, too traumatized, should step back and let progressive whites talk to their conservative white colleagues and relatives. We need them. This country is going to be saved by the alliance between progressive whites and people of color. Steve Phillips writes about it. in this incredible, he's done 2 books now. And I think that that's the alliance, those are the kinds of alliances we have to build. So find your allies and work together. But, you know, we're already better off now than we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Thank you.
Oh, wow, sorry, I didn't realize it was...
No, just do this?
We can hear you.
Okay. So this isn't really much of a questionnaire thing. It's more so the fact that, so sorry this sounds very jambled, but I feel like in many ways too, not so much, I feel like in a lot of ways, I'm going to just say this in general, we all have this very built-in racism, especially with me, I think. Even though I am Hispanic in my background, I have a Hispanic mother that's Ecuadorian, but I also have a dad that mostly identifies as Irish. So, oh, goodness, so sorry. So I feel like for me and many others, I want to learn how to educate myself on this matter. And luckily, I am taking courses that are teach me more about like backgrounds, especially like in Black studies, because I feel like it is very important for us, and not even just within classrooms. It goes for anywhere, especially within how our government is in today. And I feel like when people say that, like, you know, we have progressed in so many ways compared to how it was back in like maybe the 80s. It was horrific what people had to go through. People who are LGBTQ, people who are underrepresented, people who are a different religion. It beyond scares me what they had to go through, the pain they had to go through to push themselves to here today. And it's so happy. I'm shaking right now.
So the world changed because people like you changed it. Of an earlier generation, maybe, and you're part of this new generation. It sounds like you're already doing the work.
I really hope that I can continue to pursue that work, because in all honesty, I can't do hate anymore. I want to accept and love these people, because no matter what, cultures and everything should be respected as equal.
And you know, you're reminding me of an important point that I didn't make, that I should have made during my talk, which is that narrative shifting is what I do because I'm a journalist, but it is not the most important thing that needs to happen. It is one of the most important things that need to happen. Narrative shifting on its own is just PR. It's, you know, corporations can say Black Lives Matter, but if they're not actually doing anything about it, it's just PR. Policy shifting hand in hand with narrative shifting is what actually moves things along and changes things. Like, think about land acknowledgements, right? We often you go into liberal spaces, and there's always we'll start a talk with a land acknowledgement about the land, indigenous land that we are on. But land acknowledgements are just PR unless it's accompanied by actual change and taking seriously the land back movement. Did you know there was a land back movement? There is a movement across this country, which if you read Yes Magazine, you would know, because we cover these beautiful solutions stories of indigenous communities in conjunction with local officials returning stewardship of lands back to tribes in ways that are so beautiful. And so that's, you know, a place where policy shifting needs to meet narrative shifting. But yes, changing, you know, doing the work of changing and educating yourself is really, really important. I'm glad you're doing it. Yes. Hi. Oh, we're going up here. Yes.
Sonali, thank you so much. Thank you for just walking in our world and making it a better place as you walk through the world. My name is Anthony Dandridge. I'm a faculty member in the second oldest Black Studies department on the planet, right here at SUNY New Paltz. Like my former student, Mackenzie, I could talk about this for a while, so I did have to write it down, all right? So it should be I'm thinking about 40 seconds. All right, give me that. You talk about this idea of narrative shifting. As a matter of fact, when you had there's this narrative about whites being a minority, right? Less than 50%, but a problem with the way that they frame that is it's always us against everybody else, as opposed to understanding they are one of many. Right. So if it's always us against everybody else, you have this fear, right?
Yeah.
This fear in a variety of different ways.
Yeah.
That being said, narrative shifting. You said that storytelling got us where we are at, and in some sense a theme, and I agree that storytelling can help to get us out of this, right? A lot of my students say, well, will racism be in America or on this planet forever? I say, well, you know what, human beings created it, human beings can uncreate it. That being said, I don't feel despair because I am the change that I want to see in the world. And I understand that if one can identify negative systems, one can also identify positive systems, institutions, ideas, and individuals. I agree that they show us those efforts in isolation, the media. I tend to tie them together, and that's part of our job as we start to move forward, to tie them together. What is our story? How do we tell it? We tell it in part by way of disciplines like Black Studies, events like Sound Your Truth. My question is that many folk don't see the value in Black Studies as a discipline in the same way they don't see the value in Black people. And when I say many folk, including Black folk. How do you combat that dehumanization or disciplinary decadence? And I'll stop there.
Just keep doing what you're doing, because you've probably made more change than you realized. And most of us, we tend to think of the state of our world as being disastrous right now, but actually the fact that there are more Black Studies departments today on campuses around the country than there were 10 years ago already shows this progress. There are states and cities and university systems that require ethnic studies courses of every major now. No matter what major, it's part of the core curriculum. There's places where they're making those changes, and that is why there's pushback. The reason why the right is so terrified of critical race theory is because it works, because it's been so successful, because it's been so powerful. So we have to see it as a reactionary backlash. And of course, our corporate media loves to amplify the right and not often challenge them, but just amplify it as look how terrible things are, because they want you to keep coming back and reading the news, but not necessarily getting engaged in actually making change, because they're in the business of selling papers, not helping make change. But I don't lose heart. I think things. Because what happens when we allow cynicism to take over, it cripples us. That's what the crisis-driven news cycle does to many of us. I have, friends who I would say to them, like, we would talk. They would bring up this Trump. Oh my God, he's just he's just going to come back. He's going to get elected again. There's nothing that it's going to happen. Watch. Oh, he's not going to get convicted. And they become the purveyors of self-fulfilling prophecies, because they're so dejected by the prospect of what has happened, because many of us were so shocked in 2016 that now we're afraid to hope. And I think that feeds cynicism, and it feeds disengagement, and the last thing we can do is disengage. We cannot afford to disengage. We stand on the precipice of democracy versus fascism. That is what the 2024 election is going to be about. I'll try to keep my answers succinct too, sorry.
Hello, my name is Henry.
Hi.
Sure.
Hi.
I was wondering if you believe that there is a place in our world for the existence of conservative ideology. Are there components of conservative ideologies that are valuable to us as a society, or do we need to completely erase that and completely embrace a liberal? I think the picture is often framed as liberal versus conservative. Is there any world in which these coexist?
I think that's part of the problem, is that it's shown as this dichotomy, which is another reductive, simplistic thing that our corporate media likes to do. It's us versus them. There's that NPR show, Left, Right, and Center, right? It's like, let's just break each thing into these perfect circles and that don't intersect, this Venn diagram that doesn't have the overlap. But it turns out most of us are somewhere on the spectrum of political belief, and sometimes hold beliefs in our own mind that are contradictory to one another, the cognitive dissonance that takes place. And I think rather than asking whether there's room for conservative ideology or do we all have to adopt liberal ideology, I think that that's kind of a provocative question, one that may get us down this path of us versus them. And my question always comes back to, do you believe in, do you embrace democratic values? And the idea that has been upheld in the Constitution but not fully realized, which is that we're all human beings that are equal, deserving of equality. If we can start from that place, if we can start from an agreement that democracy is the way forward, that human beings deserve equal rights, then everything else that follows from there and how we achieve that is going to be the place where you can have some interesting and powerful discussions and debates about how we make that real. But if you question those basic tenets, then, and if that's conservatism, if conservatism is believing some human beings are more deserving than others, or believing that democracy is broken and needs to be replaced, then we are talking about an us versus them, sadly. But I don't think there's that many thems.
Thank you.
that we think.
Final question?
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Omar. I'm a graduate student in the Social Justice Educational Studies program. I have my friends. I have my friends and classmates with me, and also Dr. Sheridan up in the corner over there. We appreciate your time, and we're just talking while you're presenting, and we're wondering,
Oh, no, it's fine. Uh-oh, you just got yourself into trouble. They were passing notes. You just outed yourself, yeah.
Just with all the, you were saying, the language that's out there in the media that's just pushed out, how can we cultivate black joy in media and just protect our peace while we're navigating this world and doing this work?
That's a beautiful question, and thank you for asking it. And again, it's something that as I work in Yes Media and Yes Magazine, we do so much of that. Alicia Garza, who runs the Black Futures campaign, I'm sure you're familiar with her work. This is the kind of work that she does, building these, world building. If we want a world where we can all thrive and experience joy, let's start imagining it right now. Let's start talking about it, and let's start acting as if it's real, even if it means sometimes stepping away from the craziness of the world. And I think America owes so much to Black people and to Indigenous people that we can't even begin to start talking about equity and equality till we start undoing the harms of the past. So one of the things that I write about and that I work on is not just abolition but reparations, right? Land back and reparations. How do we, through actual policy, compensate for the damage that was done to allow the joy to take place, and to really to start to say it's more than just a slogan. Black Lives Matter is more than just a slogan. How do we realize that? And you and I are part of the fabric of this nation and are in it together, but we still have different experiences. And as a non-Black person of color, I understand that I sit somewhere else in the hierarchy of where I receive or am tainted, or targeted by oppression. So it's important for me to understand that as well. So thank you for bringing up the importance of centering Black joy. And I take my leadership from people like Ruth Wilson Gilmore and Angela Davis and Andrea Ritchie and Mariam Kaba and all of these incredible thinkers, and the great Bell Hooks, who was one of our powerful, and I quote her in my book, she was seminal to my education, and taking leadership from those thinkers who are reminding us over and over again that we can't just walk away from past injustices either. We have to compensate for them.
I thank you for those who asked questions. We knew we couldn't get to every question. Now you see why I didn't focus on the biography of the person, but you needed to hear the narrative coming from the person. That it's about experiencing in real time, in a palpable way, what's being said, whether we agree with every word or not. And so, Sonali, I won't ask questions, but since I have the podium, when you talk about the experiment of democracy and the value of democracy, it reminds me, and some of you have heard me speak to this recently, this country has never experienced a moment since the first settlers from Europe landed here where there was peace. Not that they brought discord, but this experiment has never been actualized. So we're on a trajectory in a direction that we have never had. So it takes bravery to confront something, and what it's about is stepping out. You know, we talk about building the thing while you're moving, and fear holds us back because oftentimes we want certainty for the solution. If you wait on certainty, your grass is mass. That's not what I really wanted to say, but that's what I said. When we talk about the policies that have evolved from such a context, we understand that the premise for almost every social policy in the United States is brought from a European mindset of means testing. The Elizabethan Poor Laws are the paradigm upon which we've created the value system that says you are worthy or you are unworthy. That's part of what you're talking about. And then you talk finally, I'm going to end here, about the reality of dissonance. And this is where a liberal arts education is crucial in a contemporary environment. That if you can't chew gum and walk at the same time, you're destined to let AI lead your life. Thank you, and let Sonali go first. So hold your seat for just a moment. Grab my 2 books. I want 2. So Donovan, you got your wallet? He's going to grab, right? He said he got yours. He's going to grab mine. I really want to thank each and every one of you who took time. We morphed the time frame just a little bit, but I think that's crucial. We are faced in the past 2 weeks with horrific events that have hit the globe on scales that none of us could have imagined 3 weeks ago. And I don't want to get into the geopolitics of it. I've come from meetings across the country where presidents are being taken down for what they say or don't say. You have experienced me for a year. Most of you know that I'm there in presence and in heart, and I'm not afraid to take on the hard issues. So backing away from it is not what I'm talking about. I'm really talking about leaning into it. I am not a proponent for making declarative statements and not being able to back it up. That it's not about what you say, and as has been said, you will be remembered for your actions more than your words. And that's what this is about right now. We're going to have statements coming from people out of their eyeballs. Not what I wanted to say. That will have no value and no meaning 2 seconds after they make the statement. What are we willing to do? And that's what I'm asking each and every one of you. What do you take away from here? We stand in solidarity with communities that have suffered in unimaginable damage in Israel. We, this week, had the situation on the hospital, and the media jumped on it immediately and gave us narratives that are now being recanted. We need people who sit comfortably for 2 minutes to understand the confluence of factors and that we're after something greater. I just ask you to bear with us and lean into solutions, and please don't fuel the problem. Thank you.